Hey everybody, what's up, taters? This is Tree from treeoflogic.com. So I finally got a chance to do this video. This is part 2. It's the final video. I want to apologize for the delay. This is very emotionally draining work for me. I'm really good at what I do when it comes to investigating and researching. Very good. I'm very good at what I do. And I had to admit that this was just a little bit emotionally draining. And then I started to discover a lot of things that were not mentioned in the movie and trying to decipher, okay, is this more important to share than this information? And so to cut down on a lot of information and I wanted concise and compact and to give it to you, it was just a lot of debating and I don't know, just to put everything together so that I don't lose you. It just took some time. But anyway, I finally finished, and without further ado, let's go and recap everything, or basically everything that I've talked to you about and educated you about in part 1, and then we'll proceed from there dealing with the trial. Okay, so here's the recap. On April the 19th, 1989, between 30 to 50 males were in Central Park due to it being a holiday week. Some of the males began to participate in criminal activities while the others look on or try to talk to the females in the park, and others were just basically hanging out. I don't understand why people thought that just because all those young men with a sprinkle of girls in there were all up to mischief. That was not true. It's stupid to sit up here and say they were all in there to assault people and to burglarize, to do any kind of criminal activities. You had some good kids in that group, and then you just had some that were juvenile delinquents as well as criminals. And basically that's just ghetto life. You see crime, you don't run and call the police. And like I said, this is back in the late 80s, early 90s. You didn't have cell phones back then. So just basically you just observed things and just kept it close to the chest, because that's basically the ghetto creed, snitches get stitches. So upon seeing the mischief in the park, Cory Wise was the first to leave immediately to go see his girlfriend and then to go home. And then minutes later, Yusuf Salam followed. The police arrived in the park around 10:15 p.m. and approximately 10:30 p.m. police started to arrest the juveniles in the area as well as inside the park. The following morning at 1:30 a.m., 2 males found the body of Tricia Meili. And here's something I found out in reference to investigating. The reason why her body was found was because this is some side information that I noticed. I was like, well, I'm going to say it anyway because I thought it was interesting. Is the reason why her body was found because the 2 men that was on that side of the park were going into a secluded area to have relations, quote unquote relations, and they found the body, and that's when they alerted the closest police officer near the park. Okay, so the detectives along with the doctors stated that Tricia Meili was assaulted and raped between the hours of 10:30 p.m. and 10:55 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the east side of Central Park, while the boys were arrested on the west side of Central Park at 10:30 p.m. Based upon those times, it would be impossible for them to be suspects or even in that area to rape Tricia Meili. The boys were who were arrested in the first roundup at the park were about to be let go by the night shift police officers until Linda Fairstein demanded that the police hold them there for questioning. Once the boys were held by police, the homicide detectives grabbed them one by one, questioned them without the presence of their parents or lawyers. And this is illegal. That's the reason why there was no tape recordings, there was no video recordings, and it was not transcribed. And this is what you have to understand. There was several interrogations there, and a lot of these, I would have to say, these very corrupt and evil people who are trying to pass off the video as if that is their initial interrogation. These people are lying. They're trying to project a false narrative. And that's what I want you all to understand. The videotapes were not the first interrogation. Okay, the first interrogation happened the following day on April the 20th, and it was not recorded whatsoever or transcribed. So here's the thing. Those detectives denied the parents to come in there with the children. It's illegal to do that. Denied them a lawyer. Once again, illegal to do that. The detectives made sure that the interrogation was not recorded or transcribed because they were physically and verbally torturing the boys, in addition to feeding them stories about the crime to give a false comparison in exchange of the promise of going home. So they were coerced to mention names that they had caught or read of the boys that have caught, the easier ones that they knew that they can frame. And they kept telling them, well, you know, the woman had cuts right here. Well, you know, she was all bloodied up. Well, you know, they were telling them the story of the crime and the crime scene in order to get them to confess falsely of being there and participating in the crime. All of this was coerced, and the entire day, okay, they were arrested on the 19th. That entire day on the 20th, they were at the precinct being harshly interrogated, their rights being violated. They were denied access to their parents, and they were denied access to a lawyer. Or they were not given food. They were not given an opportunity to go to the bathroom, nor were they given anything to drink. And it was just basically torture, playing mind games of good cop, bad cop, lying. And I told you guys in the last video that police officers and detectives are allowed to lie to you during the interrogation. And the fact that they kept telling the parents, you know, he's just going to be here and just going to talk for a minute and he'll go home. He'll go home. Hey, just tell us what we need to know. You go home. You go home. And this was a very scary place for these young men. And they just, that's all their agenda. That's all their agenda was, is to go home. So if they had to lie and if they had to basically tell the police officers and the detectives what they wanted to know in order to go home, so be it. That's just how it is. Okay. So I also forgot to mention in the first video that during the 2-hour confession from Korey Wise, I forgot to mention this because I took so many notes on his confession. It was just mind boggling. But, I want to say this. If you go and watch his confession, you will see Korey tell the prosecutor, Elizabeth Ladera, that, yeah, he was beaten up by the police and the detectives. As a matter of fact, I'm going to paraphrase what he was saying. Korey said, you know, when the detective was fussing at me and cussing at me and hitting on me, that's when I realized I lied about not being there. And I said, how could I forget to not mention that? How could I forget to mention that Korey even said in front of the prosecutor that, yeah, the detectives hit me. Detectives, and when they hit me, they reminded me that I was lying. And I cannot believe that these stupid people are actually using this as an example of their guilt. If they really took the time to watch that 2 hours, but a lot of people don't have that attention span, and they don't have the patience to really look at Korey's testimony, false confession. But to me, it was more than 2 hours because I'm rewinding, fast forwarding, and taking a lot of notes. And it was just so many notes of taking in reference to Korey confession alone that it was just like only corrupt. Remember, corrupt people defend corruption. Corrupt people also defend other corrupt people. So that was something I forgot to mention in part 1, and I'm mentioning now. And you can go back and see that video confession, and you'll see for yourself where Cory does admit that he was hit, but he makes excuses for the detectives hitting him to remind him he lied, which is not true. They just took advantage of his mental state of mind. Okay, so the following day, a list was created with Yusuf and Antron's name being put on the list. Cory's name was never on the list. The boys never mentioned him being there because Cory wasn't there. The boys never mentioned his name because Cory wasn't there. The only time the boys mentioned Cory's name is when the other detectives who picked him up the following day on the 20th fed it to the remainder men like the Raymond, Kevin, Antron. You know, they picked up Cory and they took advantage of the situation and basically fed his name to the other boys to name. Now Antron was told to tell the police what they wanted to hear, and that was during his first interrogation, which was not recorded. His second interrogation was recorded, and his Miranda rights were given. Like I said, there were several interrogations that were not recorded, okay, where their rights were violated. They were not given an opportunity to, except for Antron, Kevin, and Raymond. Their parents were only allowed to sit in on the videotaping after the boys were abused verbally and physically. Now Yusuf was interrogated, but his interrogation was stopped by his mother because his mother knew the law. His mother said, "You cannot talk to my son or interrogate him without me present, without a lawyer." And when she was persistent about it, they had to basically give in and let Yusuf go. Now, since Cory was the oldest and yet the weakest, he was tortured the most. Kevin and Cory were taken to the crime scene, which is a violation of criminal procedures. I don't think I put emphasis on this on the first video, but I'm putting it now on this video. It is against criminal procedures to let a suspect come to the crime come to the scene of the crime unless it is a dead body buried there. But in this case, there wasn't no dead body. Tricia was in the hospital in a coma. So to bring a suspect in hopes of getting his DNA on the crime scene, that in itself just is up for a civil lawsuit. It's not illegal to do that, but it's against criminal procedures. And if you talk to any police officer or investigator or even a homicide detective, they will tell you that this is a huge no-no. And this is a good way of getting your case thrown out if they had a good lawyer and that lawyer put emphasis on the fact that Cory and Kevin was brought to the crime scene. That's just dumb. But they didn't know their rights, and they didn't really have good lawyers at the time, so they didn't know. Since they couldn't get a false confession out of Yusuf, Detective McKenna wrote a false confession on Yusuf's behalf and forged his name based upon the Miranda card that Yusuf wrote, and then they submitted this false evidence to the judge to get a arrest warrant, and then they went to Yusuf's home 2 days later and arrested him. On April the 21st, Elizabeth Ladera, along with the abusive detectives, recorded their second interrogation, and this is what I got to get you guys to understand. It's the second interrogation that you see the video confession, and everybody's pretending as if that's the first interrogation. During the second recorded video interrogation, that's when their rights were read and most of the parents were present. And I have to put emphasis on the fact that the parents were told that, listen, your son is just a witness. He's not a suspect. They were lying to the parents and telling them, we're just going to record them and then you can take them home. Remember, the got you part was Say this, you can go home. Let them say this, you can go home. Testify on video in front of our prosecutor, you can go home. And then once they just did that, they did not go home. They put them in jail. Afterwards, after they gave their false testimony and false confessions, they all were booked on 13 charges and taken to jail. All of the boys made, during their arraignment, they all made bail except for Korey and Raymond. The media exposed their faces. They doxed them by giving their full name, their addresses, and in some cases, their phone numbers. They painted the young men as the wolf pack, showing them to be animalistic. They said that the criminal activities that they were participating in, they said that the boys called it wilding. This is a lie. And I've had some racist white man send me a videotape of one of the boys saying, yeah, they said they're going to go wild and they're going to go wild. And I looked at the videotape and it showed that the tape was recorded on April the 22nd. Now, remember what I told you all. They were arrested on April the 19th. On April the 20th, the entire day, on April the 20th, they were coerced, they were fed false information, they were misled, they were physically abused, they were verbally abused, and they were coached on what to say. And so these crooked detectives were telling these young children, these young boys, oh yeah, we heard that Raymond said, or Kevin said, that they call this wilding. You ever heard about that? Because, we want you to get on a recorder and say that that you heard them over here, heard them say that they're going to go wilding and giving a definition of wilding. This was all stuff made up by the detectives because the black youths, black and brown youth did not talk that way. And this was just a bunch of older white men who did not understand juvenile slang, and therefore they're coercing these young black and brown boys to falsely give confessions about what wilding is, which is not what they called it, and they don't even use that type of slang for going into the park. Everything that you see when it comes to the videotapes on April the 21st and the 22nd is fake confessions, forced fake testimonies, coercions, and they were all fed lies to give in front of Elizabeth Lidera. Please don't forget that, okay? It's important that you understand that. Now, Trump's role in this is that he spent $85,000, which included several ads, but it also included 4 full-page ads calling for the death penalty of these boys if they are found guilty. And this was done during their first week. They haven't even been arraigned yet, which happened that weekend, and he's calling for the death. And even to this day, like right now, it's Thursday, and April Ryan asked Trump 2 days ago, do you want to apologize to the Central Five? And Trump, is still saying, no, they admitted guilt. And I told you guys in the first video, it's amazing how, Trump want to call mainstream media fake news when he participated in fake news in the late 80s and in 1989, and basically after they were exonerated. And he said that the whole Russiagate was a witch hunt, but this is not a witch hunt. And to me, this clearly shows classism and racism. Totally. And I got to put the classism in there, guys, because you have rich people who grew up privileged. And we're talking about several races here, because here you have Candace Owens, who grew up privileged, who is defending President Trump's position on the Central Park Five, who also grew up privileged. These people feel that they are better than those who grew up poor. And also race plays a part in it too, because here you feel that because these are black and brown youth, that they are not given the benefit of the doubt that, okay, the DNA evidence do not even connect them to the crime scene whatsoever, and that the police officers really coerced them, abused them verbally and physically, played with their mind, lied to their parents, denied their rights, violated their rights. Everything that was done to them, you don't even want to revisit it. You still want to stick to your brand. And this is the reason why I'm so angry with this particular case, because I told you, if you guys watch any of my past videos, I'm sorry about to go on a rant. I got to get this out. I'm sorry. I apologize. When you look at my past videos, the biggest thing I hated about the Republican Party, especially with grifters like Candace Owens, Brandon Tatum, Anthony B. Logan, all these other like fake mega cult leaders, cult followers, wearing the red mega hats. What I hated was they brought identity politics to the right. We've never had identity politics, and now it's like you're catering about the black community, and they never gave a damn about the black community. And here it is, Trump is showing you he doesn't give a damn about you all, because he can't even do right by the black community. He so desperately want to save you from the Democratic Party. They are so full of shit. It's amazing. Sorry, I had to get that out. Okay, so thank you for allowing me to do that. All right, so now let's get on to, after the guys have been arrested, now we're going to get into the actual content of part 2, which is the final video. So after the boys were arrested 2 weeks later, and they were given the arraignment that weekend, on May the 3rd, Tricia Meili wakes up from her coma. The detectives were immediately called when doctors realized that she could talk. Upon the detectives' arrival, they asked Tricia Meili if she can explain what happened to her that night. She was out jogging in the park. Tricia stated that she has no memory of what happened that night, and doctors diagnosed her with amnesia due to the traumatic brain injury she suffered from the attack. Nevertheless, the newspapers continued to paint the boys as animals and evil juvenile delinquents, even though the boys have never been in trouble with the law before. They didn't have a criminal record, and nor did they participate in any illegal activities in the park that night. That's another important thing you all need to keep in mind. They didn't do anything. They didn't participate in any of the burglaries or the robberies or anything. Especially Corey and Yusuf, who went home early that night. Not once did they use the word alleged. The mainstream media never used the word alleged when describing these boys. They along with Donald Trump, assumed the guilt of the boys and portrayed them as confirmed rapists. The mainstream media was still vicious due to Trump's ads. Even during their trial, the court, and I'm going to show a picture of it right now, the courtroom artists would accentuate and enhance their features, making them look animalistic, like making their lips bigger, making their nose bigger, their eyes bigger, darkening up their skin. The only dark skin boy at that time was Yusuf, but they darkened everybody else's skin to make them look more close like apes or monkeys. So you had this like King Kong mentality of the poor, helpless white woman. That's just what the mainstream media did. And that was pure racism in itself. So anyway, I want to say that you need to keep in mind that the police used these boys as scapegoats, and they were quick to find someone to take the fall for this crime in order to make the city of New York feel safe again. This in turn will put them in a prime position to receive more government funding, more grants, and also receive more donations from the fat cats connected to Wall Street. The police needed easy targets, and out of all the 14 boys, Antron, Kevin, Yusuf, Raymond, and Corey were the easiest. They didn't know their rights. They were too young to fight back. They were too trusting, too naive, and very impressionable. This is why detectives were able to successfully coerce them to give false confessions after feeding them information about the crime, in addition to enhancing the false narrative of wilding. Remember, that was never a thing amongst them. They never said, let's go to the park and wilding. That was made up by the detectives. Please remember that. All the kids who have been in trouble with the police before and who had criminal records knew not to talk to the police without their parents and without lawyers. But these young men did not know that, and that's why they were caught up in the system. Okay. Now, everyone that was assaulted and robbed that night in the park was identified in a photo lineup by the victims. So the victims were able to identify their attackers in a photo lineup, and those boys were jailed and they were found guilty and jailed. Okay. Now, after the arraignment, Antron, Yusuf, and Kevin spent most of their time with their family, staying secluded in their homes. And this was a very hard time for them because, like I said, the mainstream media had doxed them. So you had a lot of people calling their homes and threatening to come kill them, black and white. Now, this wasn't just white people. This is black people doing it too. And Yusuf, because he was so tall and distinguishable from the other kids, basically Yusuf's mother would camouflage Yusuf because she really feared for his life. And a lot of those boys' mothers had to change their phone numbers because of the harassment calls that they were getting, as well as a lot of the hate mails, because they were completely doxxed by mainstream media. So, but Raymond dad couldn't afford to get him out on bail. So Raymond went to Spofford Juvenile Center. Spofford, I think it's pronounced Spofford. I could be mispronouncing. And by the way, I'm so tired. I'm sleep deprived. So my pronunciation, I'm not going to enunciate words correctly in this. And Corey was sent to Rikers Island. Now let's talk about Matias Reyes, because this is when it really gets interesting. So while the boys who are secluded in their homes, and then the other two are incarcerated, and the police were so desperate to pin this rape on them, they were neglecting women who were out there alone, because they really had the rapist who really raped Tricia out loose, and they had blood on their hands because Matias ended up killing a woman. So let me go ahead and go over his track record from what happened, and let me give you an insight on why Matias was such a cruel, animalistic. Then you're talking about an evil man. This guy was evil, but let me explain to you why he was so evil. Now, Matias Reyes was born in Puerto Rico in 1971, and it was there that he suffered sexual abuse from the male relatives of his mother. When he told his mother about the sexual abuse, she refused to believe him, and due to the shame that was brought on the family because of his accusations, but he really was sexually abused, she basically packed them up, and they both moved from Puerto Rico to New York. And this is when Matias was 13 years old. However, his mother found a boyfriend, and she just straight up abandoned Matias at the age of 15. And he was living alone. He had to fend for himself, and he was able to live in abandoned cars, even go from some areas where he would stay on the streets. And he had this extreme hatred for his mother, because just like Antron's father, his mother let him down. His mother put him in harm's way, and then she left him to fend for himself in New York. Out of all places, he was taken from his homeland in Puerto Rico and brought to New York in America, and he had to fend for himself just like an animal. So he had a hatred for women. And if you understand rapists, the way of conquering women is just basically their hatred for their mothers is a way of getting back at them is to rape women. It's not like a sexual thing for them. It's more of a conquering thing for them, a vengeful thing for them. And they pick women that they're easily able to prey upon to feed this need for vengeance and their hatred for their mothers. So during the year of 1988, while Matias was 17 years old, he went to a church located on the east side of Central Park. There he saw a woman named Jackie Harbach, who was 27 years old at the time. As she was leaving the church, he went up behind her, grabbed her, and dragged her down the stairs to an empty corridor. After assaulting and robbing her, he demanded that she take her top off. This is when she began to panic and begged Matias to not rape her. She's like, please don't rape me. Please don't rape me. I have a nasty disease. You don't want to get it. Please don't rape me. Well, actually, to my surprise, this worked on Matias, because when she told him that she has a nasty disease, he basically just took her jewelry, took her money, took every, I think he took some other things from her, and he left. He didn't sexually assault her. He did physically assault her. Like, he choked her out. She came to, and that's when he was going to rape her. And also, he basically was going to do some other things to her, but because she had told Matias that she had a disease, he walked out. But that was the first and last woman that would ever be so fortunate. Okay. So, he left her unharmed after that. So in April the 17th, this was 2 days, April the 17th, 1989, 2 days before he raped Tricia Meili, Matias Reyes he grabbed a woman, and her name is unlisted, by the way, for obvious reasons. He began beating her and raping her, and she was 26 years old. And this happened on the eastern side of Central Park. Once again, he stayed mainly on the east side of Central Park, and his victims were attacked there. Now, basically, while he was raping this woman, he was spotted by a passerby and fled the scene. So somebody who was passing by the area where he was currently raping this woman, they saw each other. The passerby saw him, and he saw the passerby, and he basically fled the scene. The victim, whose name is withheld, identified her attacker to the police as a Hispanic male who had fresh stitches on his lower chin. After putting out an inquiry, after the detectives and the police put an inquiry out to the local hospitals, they did come up with a match of a Hispanic male who had a cut. And the reason why he had a cut is because that came from another rape victim prior to the one that he had previously assaulted on April the 17th, and he had to get stitches put there in that area. So they got his name. The hospital said, yeah, this person is Matias Reyes. So they gave the detective his name. They also had the DNA, his semen, his skin, and his hair on the first woman. So they had Matias Reyes' DNA on file, and they never thought about using it for Tricia Meili. Please don't forget that, okay? The New York Police Department, they were scum with how they handled this case, because they could have saved a lot of people, a lot of women heartache, and a lot of those boys their life and their livelihood. So anyway, unfortunately, the investigators did not pursue the case any further, nor did they submit the DNA for further testing. They just put it on file. And the police closed the rape case 6 weeks later. They were so consumed with the raping of Tricia Meili that they never even pursued to take the DNA or even the case of this rape victim, the name Matias Reyes, and even put it together with Tricia Meili whatsoever. So here's the thing. So then that happened on April the 17th. Tricia Meili was raped on April the 19th, okay? And because of all the news and the media coverage, Matias Reyes basically laid low for 4 months. For 4 months, no mugging, no raping, no assaults, no nothing. He just laid low. He just took a break. And then the New York Police Department gave Matias the name East Side Slasher. I thought it was the East Side Rapist, but when I look at the archives of the newspapers, it was the East Side Slasher, not the East Side Rapist. So in June of 1989, Reyes raped and murdered a 24-year-old woman named Lourdes Gonzalez in her basement apartment on East 97th Street. Gonzalez, who was pregnant at the time of the attack, had her children in the apartment with her. So Reyes forced the children into Gonzalez's bedroom while he raped her in the living room. And then he began to stab her in the eyes as well as in the body 9 times, thus killing her. Then in August the 5th, 1989, he raped a woman named Meg, her last name has been withheld, who eventually escaped and ran 3 flights downstairs and banged on the super, I think they call them, the people, the janitor of the building, and told him that she'd just been raped and she'd just been robbed and the rapist is still upstairs. He ran up there and attacked Matias Reyes and held him down until the police arrived to arrest him. During the interrogation, the police and actually taking more DNA from him, the police were able to connect him to the murder of Lourdes Gonzalez. They were able to connect Matias Reyes to 5 other rapes, to 2 attempt rapes, as well as a long list of muggings. Based upon a plea bargain, Matias Reyes was sentenced to 33 years to life. All right, so now let's talk about the trial. The prosecution arranged to try the 5 defendants in the Meili case in 2 separate groups, which enabled them to control the order in which certain evidence would be introduced to the court. Each trial took about 2 months. Prior to the scheduled court date, the DNA results returned and it did not match any of the boys. The DA, Elizabeth Ledera, decided to muddy the waters by saying that the DNA evidence is inconclusive. And I noticed that Brandon Tatum kept using that word. Listen to this. Instead of saying that there were no DNA match, saying inconclusive put doubt in your mind. Saying there was no DNA connection or no DNA match removes all doubt. Later during the investigation, it was discovered that one of Tricia's socks had semen on it. Elizabeth Ledera was hoping that the DNA from that sample of that sock would match one of the boys, but it didn't. She also said that she found a blonde pubic hair in Raymond's underwear, and turned out that she was lying about that. But I want to go back just really briefly in reference to the word inconclusive instead of no DNA connection. The corrupt cop known as Brandon Tatum kept saying that in his video. The DNA were inconclusive. The DNA was inconclusive. This is word trickery that corrupt cops like to use a lot. Because like I said, inconclusive means that, well, it could have been them, but we don't have enough DNA. They had plenty of DNA sample to test, okay? But it only came to one person. But like I said, in order to muddy the water for the jury, instead of saying there was no DNA connection, and it really wasn't, that is the truth. The DNA they had did not connect them to the rape, to the scene whatsoever, because that DNA belonged to Matias Reyes. It did not belong to any of those boys. But if you want to put doubt in anybody's head that there's a possibility that there could have been DNA, but the police officers were not able to collect it, you use the word inconclusive. It's just word trickery, and you got to be aware of that, folks. Just be aware of the words people use. It's also important for you to know that there was no DNA connection between the boys and Tricia Meili. No, not inconclusive DNA. There was no DNA connection between the two. If they raped her, it would be impossible, given the type of crime and the huge amount of blood at the crime scene, that all of the boys would have zero DNA connection to her. It would basically be impossible. That entire crime scene was filled with blood. They would have left some part of their hair or skin if she scratched them. There was none. So obviously these boys were not there. Now, with no DNA connection, Elizabeth Ladera created the unknown sixth person at the crime scene. Even though the crime scene depicts only one attacker and one penetrator, the prosecutor presented a different scenario. So this heifer says that what happened was there was an unknown attacker who bound her up, who, beat her up. And then after he raped her, he left. And then that's when the other boys couldn't sexually perform. But they try to rape her anyway. And this is just BS, because like I said, there was so much blood there. Those boys would have left with some kind of blood, especially with the fact that they kept saying they slapped her, which is impossible, because like I said, she was bound up. Blood was everywhere. And they would have left a handprint. Matias Reyes' fingerprints and handprints was all over her body. So this is what I'm saying. It's that they really, really cornered these young men into a false confession for a crime they didn't commit. So on June the 13th, 1990, Antron, Yusuf, and Raymond trial starts. All the detectives lied on the witness stand. They lied about denying the boys access to their parents. They lied about denying them food, water, and sleep. They also denied about promising the boys and their parents that they will go home if they just confess. They just straight up lied. And they also said that the way they testified in front of them the first time around is the way they talked to detectives during the video testimony. I mean, this right here just made me angry, because, when they got on the stand and said how these boys behaved in the video testimony is how they behaved during their untaped, unrecorded, untranscribed interrogation. It just made me very angry with how can you do this? I don't understand how people can even go to bed at night. I don't know. Maybe you have to be a psychopath to do this, and I think that's what they are. Here's another reason why I feel for Antron as well, because during this the trial, Antron's father was initially there in the beginning. But after he testified, because they didn't really get that part right in the movie, he was there in the beginning, he testified, and then after he testified, then he just left. He went ghost. He left Antron, and he left his mother. They came back from the trial one day and all of his stuff was gone. And this is why I say I don't blame Antron for hating his father. And I really don't like the fact that Ava DuVernay, or however you pronounce her name, put, I don't know, maybe people have to feel good, but I'm just sorry, guys. You got to get used to understanding that people have bad parents. And I'm speaking as someone who has very, very evil and bad parents. And we have the right to hate our parents. To sit up here and make it feel good, like, oh no, they hugged and they hugged it out. That didn't happen. And when you think about it, with the fact that this Antron went to jail because of his dad. Antron sat there and was humiliated physically and verbally in front of his dad. His dad was not there to protect him. His dad was also there to tell him to lie. After, raising Antron to always tell the truth, he flipped the script on him. And then when he needed his father the most, his father dipped on him. You know what? To hell with this guy. The prosecutor brought in, during the trial, the prosecutor brought in Tricia Meili for shock value and pity. She was walking very slowly using a cane, and she needed assistance from the bailiff to help reach her seat. And by this time, she was still suffering from amnesia. She still says she suffered from amnesia now. I don't believe her. I'm sorry. I don't really have pity for this woman. And the reason why I don't is because she's still keeping up with the white lies. She still defends the detectives, regardless of the information that has come out to show that these boys who are now men had nothing to do with it. She still sides with the detectives and said, "I believe that these boys have done these things to her." So screw this woman. I have no pity for her. So excuse me for just not feeling sorry for her. So they only brought her up there to get the sympathy and from the jury, like, oh, look at this woman, look what happened to her, somebody's got to pay, and here's who's going to have to pay for it. So that's just it was just for a show and tell. That's all that was. Anyway, shortly after that, the prosecutor had Detective McKenna read off the fake and forged testimony of Yusuf Salam. Remember, I talked about that. Before the prosecutor introduced the so-called confession tapes, the lawyers of the boys objected on the basis that they were coerced. Like I said, the lawyers were trying to convince the judge and jury, like, we should not have these tapes because they were coerced. But because the detectives lied under oath saying that they were not coerced, unfortunately their credibility, which is they didn't have any credibility, superseded the truth, and their statement that it didn't happen actually held more water than the lawyers saying it did happen. So basically, the DA said that the boys were read their Miranda rights, which was lies, in the first interrogation. With Antron, Raymond, and Kevin's parents present, that was a lie. And what they're saying is that the boys in the first interrogation, the parents were there. They were not. And then once they got their confession and signed for it, that's when they brought in the videotape. So this is what really got the boys convicted. It was the coerced video confession. It wasn't any evidence to prove that they were, there was no evidence to prove that they were there or they participated in it. So the prosecutor, Elizabeth, said that, saying that the lawyer arguing that the boys being forced is laughable because they were sitting there calmly and matter-of-factly talking about the rape of a white woman in a nonchalant way, giving general details that made them look very guilty in the eyes of the jury. Even though we all know that their confessions were forced, that they were fed this information in exchange to go home, with the detectives denying this fact, it made the boys look merciless because they didn't show any remorse, sadness, or regret during their confession. Their confession made it look like they were heartless. And this is the reason why this left a lasting impression upon the jury, because they didn't see that these boys were broken down to be forced to give this false confession. They looked at these boys as animals who were just they just rape white women every day, and this was just another day in Central Park for them, and it wasn't like that at all. This is what got them convicted. Even though there was no DNA connection and each of their so-called confessions had inconsistency, it didn't matter because in the eyes of the jury, they were confessing to a crime. So with the only evidence against Yusuf was a fake written confession and the video confessions from the others, the prosecutor offered them a plea deal, which they turned down, and rightfully so. They didn't do it, so don't get no plea deal. So after presenting their closing arguments, the jury left for deliberation, which lasted for 10 days. Now, the reason why it lasted that long is because one of the jurors, a white guy, he was a white older man. He had a hard time believing the confessions of these boys with zero DNA evidence. And it just really bothered him. And he was the only one in there that was holding his ground, saying, well, I don't see how the confessions were inconsistent. And what happened was the other jurors, especially the black ones, begin to bully this man, this white man. It's important that you understand this, okay? Because there were 4 or maybe 5, I know it definitely was 4 other jurors on that panel, black jurors on that panel, and all of them just automatically like, they're guilty. But it was one white guy who was like, there's no DNA evidence. So they basically bullied him and pressured him, and he finally caved on the 10th day. And he gave the final guilty verdict instead of having a hung jury. Now, on August the 18th, 1990, the 3 boys were found guilty of 7 counts of rape, assault of the female jogger, and they also found them guilty of assault and robbery of John Laughlin. That was the male teacher jogger. On October the 22nd, 1990, this was now the trial of Korey and Kevin, which also lasted for 2 months. Due to Antron Raymond's and Yusuf's lawyer going the route of exposing the truth of the injustice that the boys endured underneath the corrupt cops not working, Kevin and Korey's lawyer decided to took a method of least resistance, which was this. Kevin's lawyer argued that Kevin was only a witness to the rape, but never participated in it. Korey's lawyer said that Korey's confession was not credible because he was forced and interrogated close to nearly 29 to 30 hours. And he also had an alibi, his girlfriend Lisa, to testify about his whereabouts during the time that Tricia was being raped. Kevin lied about the scratch on his face. That's another thing about the testimony. I watched Kevin's testimony again, right? And Kevin had a scratch right here underneath this eye. You can see it in clear as day, okay? It's right here. The prosecutor said, because the detectives told Kevin that he had to lie about the scratch and say that the woman scratched him, but it was impossible for Tricia to scratch him because 1, she was unconscious, 2, she was bound up, remember, with her own shirt. But when Kevin lied in the forced confession or the coerced confession about being scratched, remember, his scratch was right here. When Elizabeth Ladera said, where did the victim scratch you at? Kevin goes up here on his forehead and the side corner of his eye. He was like, she scratched me up here. I was like, I could break down so many of the inconsistencies in these boys' testimony. You have to be an idiot to sit up here and believe that they were telling the truth. Because clear as day, you see the scratch underneath Kevin's underneath his left eye, and he's like, she scratched me right here, and there was no markings there. Anyway, Corey's lawyer decided to put Korey on the witness stand. Now, Korey's lawyer knew that it was risky to allow Korey to testify on the witness stand in his defense, but his lawyer was hoping that the benefits would outweigh the risk when the jury learned that Korey couldn't read or write very well due to skipping school. They would see his childlike demeanor, and well, the lawyer was hoping that the jury would see Korey's childlike demeanor, which would give them an impression on the jury, that he was indeed coerced. But Elizabeth Ladera used this against Korey by asking him to read his signed confession and to read his school records showing how many times he did not attend school, his truancy. She knew that this would anger Korey, and in fact, it did make him very angry. He began to yell, "What does this have to do with my case? What does this have to do with my case? I'm tired of this man. I'm tired of this man." Like he said, man is in reference to slang. Elizabeth continued to badger him and to pressure him, and then that's when Korey began to stand up and yell. This caused the judge to send the jurors out, but in the process of sending the jurors out, Elizabeth said, "Why weren't you in school? Why don't you go to school?" And before the jurors could even listen, Korey says, "I get bullied. That's why I don't go to school. The bullies always beat me up." But it was too late. The jurors never heard him say that because they were already in their chambers at the time, and this just made Korey look unhinged, and it just wasn't really good for his case. But that was the reason why he wasn't going to school, was because he was being bullied. And Korey is not a big, actually, if you look at him today, he's not really big. He was pretty small. So he was short and he was small, and he had to understand that back then he had a learning disability and he had a partial hearing loss. So yeah, he was just a prime suspect, a prime prospect to be beaten up. And the reason why he enjoyed being around Yusuf is because Yusuf was very popular. Yusuf is strong. Yusuf is 6'3", and he felt safe around Yusuf. And basically, Yusuf was like his big brother who actually protected Korey. So that was the reason why they had that good relationship as friends back then. So regardless of what happened, regardless of how well-meaning his lawyer was, or their lawyers were, in the end, on December the 11th, 1990, the jury found Korey guilty of 3 counts of sexual abuse, physical assault, and rioting. They found Kevin guilty of 8 counts of rape, sodomy, and attempted murder. When Kevin's mother heard the verdict, she had a stroke in court and had to be rushed to the hospital. So that was very traumatic for Kevin to not only be convicted of those charges for a crime he didn't commit, but he had to sit up there and leave the courtroom as paramedics was attending to his mother. So he didn't even know what happened to her afterwards. Here's what's so messed up about all of this. Korey was convicted of less crime, but received the longest sentence because he was 16 years old. So Korey was only convicted of 3 counts, and none of this included rape or sodomy. Okay. So out of all of the boys, Korey received the less convictions, the less crime, but he received the longest sentence in a prison jail. And the thing about it is, he was not even there. And even though he was not listed as a suspect and had an alibi, he was basically taken advantage of because he had a learning disability and a partial hearing loss. But this is, listen. This is what I discovered about the entire case. You gotta understand how deep this rabbit hole goes. Please listen to me. If you right now, just stop what you're doing, and I need you to listen about the results that came from this case. Because this case set a precedent to minors being tried as adults in court and sent to adult prison, this case started a snowball effect that fueled the injustice for minors from that point on out. And after this case, minors convicted as adults and sent to prison as adults escalated 70%. Let me say that again. Before this case, you didn't have a lot of minors being tried as adults and going to adult penitentiaries. That usually wasn't the case. Once every blue moon. But after this case, it escalated 70% to where you had 70% of black and brown youth, particularly males, it was now comfortable for the judicial system, for the prosecutors, the district attorneys to now charge young men as early as 13 to try them as adults and to send them into adult prisons. This was the case that started all of that. It's amazing. I was like, wow. So you can see there's several agendas here, okay? So let's talk about, briefly, I want to talk about the jail life, and then we're going to talk about the reveal. While Antron, Raymond, Kevin, and Yusuf went to juvie, they did their best underneath the circumstances by continuing their education. All four earned their GED, and thanks to an educational program, Yusuf received his bachelor's degree with a cap and gown ceremony. Kevin received his associate degree but couldn't get his bachelor's degree because the government stopped that particular education program, which also affected Antron. So since Antron couldn't get his degree because they stopped the educational program, he went and took up a trade. So this is the reason why I said what I said in reference to the first video with the whole thing about how about the prison reform? And I said, how are you guys putting prison reform ahead of educational reform? And back then, this was back in the early 90s, they took the educational system out of the jail system, and therefore inmates were not able to get their associate degrees or their bachelor's degree, and most time not even learn a trade. In my opinion, education is more important. Educational reform is more important than prison reform. But y'all want to say the black community. All right, I'm not going to go on another rant. I promise I'm not going to do it. So anyway, Corey learning disability and particular hearing loss was like a blessing and a curse while at Rikers Island. After receiving various forms of physical and sexual abuse, it's got to be said because that's what happened. Some of the correctional officers and inmates saw that Corey was just an innocent kid who was caught up in the system due to corrupt police officers and a corrupt judge too. And after some time, they began to protect him. Corey said to this day, his demeanor and his childlike demeanor is what saved his life, because the inmates and the correctional officers know how rapists act, and they realized that Corey didn't display those characteristics of a rapist. Now, here's the thing, and I could not find an answer to this. I looked at so many interviews. I read so many articles. I did not know when this was implemented. I don't know if this was implemented when the correctional officers started to protect Corey during his 4th year or his 5th year. But I do know the first 2 and 3 years was when he was living through hell. Now remember, Cory served 13 years in prison, and it became more easier once he started to be protected by the correctional officers and the inmates. But I have to admit, based upon my research, the first 3 years was torture for him. It was really, really bad for him. Now here's the thing about parole. All 5 boys were allowed to be let out of the jail earlier on parole if they admitted any guilt, but they refused, which prevented them from being released early. However, in Cory's case, listen to this. In Cory's case, he received an additional 2 years after his parole hearing because he refused to admit that he was guilty. The parole panel told Cory that they would add 2 years every time he came to his parole hearing and refused to admit guilt. So what did Cory do? Cory stopped going to parole hearing. And I thought, can they do that? Apparently they can, but that's what the parole board would tell them. They were like, okay, here's the deal, Cory. We're going to add 2 more years to your sentence. And if you come here when your parole hearing comes up again and you come down here and you still deny that you raped this woman and you show no remorse, we're going to add another 2 years. So Cory decided, well, I'm coming to parole is going to keep him in jail for a long time. So he just stopped showing, which I think was a good thing. Now, here's the best part, and now we're coming to the conclusion, and this is the reveal. I call this the reveal part. While Cory was in jail at Rikers Island waiting for his trial on October the 15th, 1989, because his trial was going to be the following year, and he couldn't get bailed out, so he was at Rikers Island at the time. So on October the 5th, 1989, Matias Reyes and Cory meet for the first time in cell block 74. This is when Cory was actually doing some duties. I think one of the correctional officers gave him a job, and he was working, and he was listening and watching TV inside of cell block 74. Well, Matias Reyes came into Matias Reyes was still in his anger stage. He was still in his evil stage, and he turned the channel. And Cory had a problem with that and turned it back, and those two began to fight over the TV, and they got into a very, very bad fight. And because of that fight, Cory has a scar on his upper side of his forehead from that fight. Now, this is important because that's going to play a major role in when they meet the second time. So basically, Matias, after the correctional officer broke up the fight, Matias knew that Cory was in jail for a crime that he had committed. He knew that Matias knew that, he was the one who raped Tricia Meili, but he knew that Cory and the other boys were in jail for the crime that he committed, but Matias didn't care at the time. And the fact that he had a big fight with Cory, this made him hate Cory, and he held a grudge against Cory and refused to even admit that he raped Tricia Meili out of spite. Okay, out of spite, he let Cory stay in jail because they had that fight. Now, in late 2001, now here's where it gets real good. In the late 2001, Matias saw Cory again on the yard at Auburn Correctional Facility. Matias approached Cory saying, because when Matias approached Cory didn't know who he was, because this is many, many years back. This is many years later. This is like 13 years later. So Matias approached Cory saying that he was surprised to see Cory still in jail. And Cory was looking at Matias like, do I know you? And then Matias like, yeah, we met at Rikers Island. We had a fight. He said, I'm the one who put that scar. He said, man, I can't believe you still got that scar from from back in 1989. You still got that scar I gave you. And then Corey thought that Matias wanted to fight him. He was like, man, I'm not trying to fight you, dude. He was like, no. Matias was like, I'm not trying to fight you either. I just want to apologize. And that's the thing. You know, Matias said he was a born again Christian, that he received a lot of counseling, that he's basically he's a changed man. He doesn't have a lot of anger issues anymore. And he feel remorse, and he apologized to Corey for the fight that they had. Okay. And Corey forgave him. Now, of course, now that Matias is a Christian, a born again Christian, and now that he had the counseling to get over the anger and the hatred he had for his mother, he's like a different person, and he began to have counsel with his minister as well as his cellmates. And he told them, he says, you know what? I forgot all about this dude named Corey. He's in jail for a crime that I committed. And I bumped into him, and I don't know what to do. I don't know what I should do. And his minister and his cellmates was like, you need to go to the prosecutor, and you need to go to the state attorney, and as well as the prison guards, and tell them, you know, what you know. Tell them that you're the one who raped Tricia Meili, and that you're here to confess. Now, here's the thing. Because the statute of limitation for rape in New York is 9 years. I heard Ann Coulter, that help, I can't stand her either. I hate her too. Ann Coulter and Larry Elder was talking about that Matias waited right at the time when the statute of limitation was up to basically do a solid for Corey and falsely lie that he raped Tricia without Corey, which was stupid because that didn't happen because, like I said, the statute of limitation ended at 9 years for rape. Matias didn't confess about it till 13 years later. So why in the hell he would wait that long when he could? I hate ignorance. Please understand that right wingers are just as dumb as people on the left. They all are idiots. Love that mega train, I tell you. Anyway, so when Matias finally confessed to the rape of Tricia Meili, it took several months before the state of New York sent a state prosecutor, Nancy Ryan, to interrogate Matias. And on May the 23rd, 2002, which was 7 to 8 months later after he actually confessed the first time, it took them that long to actually send a prosecutor and some detectives over there to do an investigation. Matias Reyes gave specific information about the rape of Tricia Meili that corresponds with the actual rape scene, the crime scene. He also explained his MO for every woman he raped. He always bound them up. After raping them, he always asked them your eyes or your life so that they couldn't ID them. So, you know, he was like, okay, I got to either kill you or I got to damage your eyes so you don't ID me. Okay. And a lot of times, except for Miss Gonzalez, he killed her but everybody else, he damaged their eyes, including Tricia Meili's. All right. He never wore gloves. He never wore a condom, and he always left semen inside and on the victims. And he always worked alone. That's what is important here. He always worked alone. So let's go over his testimony that he told to the detectives and to the prosecutor in reference to the rape. And this is what he did in reference to the rape of Tricia Meili. Now, Matias Reyes saw Tricia Meili jogging at a slow pace on the main road on East Drive. And so you had that one main road that went around Central Park. So it goes East Drive, North Drive to West Drive. So she was jogging on East Drive. No one was on that side of the park. According to Matias, no one was on that side of the park at the time, and he could hear Tricia's Walkman, which was very, very loud, because behind him, when he was behind her, he can actually hear the type of music she was listening to. And the prosecutor, Nancy Ryan, asked Matias, why did he pick Tricia out of all of the women there? And he said he picked her because of her height, and he picked her because of the tight black running pants that she was wearing at the time. And let me just give you some context to this, okay? Tricia Meili at the time was 5'2", and she only weighed 98 pounds. Also in her book, Tricia exposed a part of herself that she was anorexic and that she had an eating disorder. And the reason why she was jogging that night is because I think she had some extra calories or whatever, and she was so obsessed in being thin. And that's the reason why she was exercising at that time of night. So being that she was short and that light, here's her comparison to Matias Reyes. Matias Reyes is 5'8", and at the time he grabbed Tricia, he weighed 190 pounds. So remember, this is a man. I don't know why people were hard to believe that he could have done all this damage to her. First of all, he's a guy. He's a man. I know you all have this false belief system of we're equal gender, we're females and men, or we're equal. No. Sorry. Testosterone trumps estrogen every time. This man was bigger than Tricia. He weighed heavier than Tricia, and he is a man. Okay, so he is stronger than her. So when Tricia took a shortcut down a dimly lit path on 102nd Street Cross Drive, that's when Matias was behind her, zig and zagging. And then seconds later, he saw a tree branch on the right side of the path. He grabbed it with both hands. He swung it behind him like a bat, and then he landed on the back of her head, which made her fall forward, causing her Walkman to fall off of her head and body and onto the ground. Matias, because she was unconscious at this time, Matias grabbed her by her ankles and dragged her towards the wooded area in Central Park by a stream. While in the woods, Matias saw her apartment or condo keys in a Velcro pouch attached to her tights or her running pants, and that's when Tricia she came to consciousness. And she was grabbing the back of her head, which was, according to Matias, was draining a lot of blood. He looked at her as she came to, and he said, "What's your address?" And she refused to give him her address. And this angered Matias because he wanted to get her address after he raped her to burglarize her apartment. So when he started to get really angry and she refused to tell him, he begins to beat her in the face with his fists. And somehow during that process, she managed to get up, but she almost got away. And this angered him even more. And this is when he picked up a rock and he begins to beat her in the head with the rock, thus knocking her out again. Okay, unconscious. Now that she's unconscious, he takes off her long sleeve white running shirt, and then he used it to bound her up like I showed you in the first video. Then he takes off her shoes, then he takes off her socks, then he takes off her tights, and then he raped her. Now, here is the part which confused everyone in reference to the semen on her sock. Let me make sure I'm not forgetting anything. Nope. So this is the thing about the sock. Once Matias Reyes finished raping Tricia, he goes and get one of her socks, clean himself off with it, and throw it back on the ground. People were thinking that there's a different DNA that was found on the sock versus found on her. No, it's the same DNA. This was amazing. I was like, wait a minute. According to the miniseries, the prosecutor, as well as the testimony of the DA, Elizabeth, she makes it seem as if the semen on the sock was to a totally different person. No, the semen on the sock, the semen inside of Tricia, the semen on her, all came to one person, Matias Reyes. Okay, so that's how the entire sock situation was involved in this. He used it to clean himself off, and then he just threw it back on the ground. Everything, all of that DNA connected to one person, Matias Reyes. So anyway, once he finished, cleaning himself off with her sock, he left her for dead. Okay, he thought she was going to die. He said he heard her, the way she was breathing. She could barely breathe, and he thought that she was going to basically drown in her own blood that was flowing through her throat. Now, at this time, Matias is leaving her at the scene, and he has blood all over the front of his pants as well as the bottom part of his shirt. When he goes back onto the 102nd Street Cross Drive path, he sees her Walkman. He puts it on, put the Walkman on his head, and then he walks home. And that is how the rape occurred. Okay, now. So during the interview, Matias said that he didn't know any of the boys before he was arrested and only met Corey and Rikers Island after they had a fight. After years of counseling, he forgot about Corey, and Matias said, had he not met Corey that day in the yard of Auburn, he would have never confessed about the rape of Tricia Meili, and those five now men, they're grown men now, would have never been exonerated. The second investigation into the rape of Tricia Meili was now performed by new police officers and new prosecutors. They talked to the medical doctor who examined Tricia that day and said that her physical, this is important, listen to this, her physical and sexual injuries was done by one person. Not multiple people, one person. This is the examiner who did the rape kit. Matias Reyes' DNA was on file due to the rape he committed 2 days before, but his sample was never compared to the one found on Tricia Meili. The New York Police Department ignored his MO on the jogger and focused on the boys. The DNA found at the crime scene and on and inside Tricia Meili excluded the boys completely. The DNA collected at the scene and on the body of Tricia Meili, as well as her sock, belonged to only one person, not multiple people. One man. It only belonged to one man, not one male, not multiple males. The skin, the hair, the semen samples at the crime scene connected to Matias Reyes and only Matias Reyes. Again, there was only one sample of DNA connected to one person, and that person was Matias Reyes. After concluding their investigation, the case was brought before the judge on December the 19th, 2002, who vacated the charges on all five of the men and signed for the release of Raymond Santana, who was arrested again in 1998 for selling drugs. Okay, he was serving a 3 to 7 year sentence because this was his second offense. And they also released Korey Wise from Auburn Correctional Facility. So in the end, Antron McCray was convicted at the age of wrongly convicted at the age of 15. He served 6 years. Kevin Richardson was wrongly convicted at the age of 13. He served 7 years. Yusuf Salam was wrongfully convicted at the age of 15. He served 7 years. Raymond Santana was wrongly convicted at the age of 14. He served 8 years. And Cory Wise was wrongly convicted at the age of 16, and he served 13 years. The news coverage of their exoneration was very minimal. It was so small that over 90% of New Yorkers didn't know about it until 2003, when they filed a $250 million civil suit against the state of New York. Former New York Mayor Mike Bloomberg and his administration fought the lawsuit for years. However, when Bill de Blasio became mayor, he awarded the five men $41 million. And since Cory spent the most years in jail, after they paid off all of the attorney fees, most of it went to Cory due to him serving the most time in jail. Now, before I conclude this video, I want to remind you all about the black conservatives who, despite all of the evidence presented here, despite all of the facts that prove that these boys are innocent, because their God Emperor Trump, Donald J. Trump, says that he believes that these boys are guilty, they themselves are going to say the same thing. And I need you to remember these people and never forget them. Remember Candace Owens, Brandon Tatum, Anthony B. Logan, as well as Larry Elder. These four black conservatives are still believing that these boys are guilty because their God Emperor Trump says they're guilty. If I was you, black folks and white folks, I would never let these people forget that they are defending corruption and that they have no credibility whatsoever. How evil do you have to be to defend this type of injustice? It's despicable, and it's just downright, oh God, disgusting as far as I'm concerned. But I want to show you something, and then I'm going to conclude the video, because I was, like I said, I was going through, it's amazing. I was going through a lot of evidence, and I was looking up this idiot right here, because I will be doing a video debunking his bullshit. So here we have Brandon Tatum, right, with this thing called the Netflix video we they see us was an absolute disgrace. It completely misleading. The central top five weren't innocent kids at all. You lying bitch. You bitch nigga. So anyway, I want to go to this part right here. If you watch, I don't understand why he did not even watch this confession, because like I said, anyone who watched this confession could see that Cory Wise was lying. As a matter of fact, even the jury, there's so much about this case I forgot to even tell you. Even the jury admitted that they know Cory was lying because of his inconsistencies and a lot of things that he brought to the confession that was not part of the crime scene. Because of his confession, this is the reason why they didn't believe that he raped her. Okay. So they too, because there was interviews of the juror, and the juror said, we could look at the video and tell that Cory was lying. So even the jurors was realizing that Cory was lying in the confession. But I want to bring your attention to this right here. Let's look at this, New York Daily, this write-up where we have this half-breed, I think, what is his name? First of all, I think it's Eric Reynolds. Yeah. So we have him use this guy is paid off, and I could do a video on him alone, but I just want to show you how corrupt cops defend corrupt cops, right? So remember now, Brandon Tatum used Eric Reynolds' testimony and not testimony, his article saying they did it. But watch this. Y'all ready? Watch this. There is a video with Eric Reynolds talking to some kids at Harvard. Okay. Now, if you go to this video, it's called Eric Reynolds Central Park 5. Okay. if you go to the comment section, this is the only fool who's commenting. First, I would like to thank the professor Jacqueline Romano and the staff and students of, I thought it was at Harvard. It's at Suffolk Community College. Anyway, he's the only one that gets to leave he's the only one who gets to leave a comment, okay? So I want you to see this, okay? This fool who is retired from the New York police department, who actually made the arrest of some of the boys that night, is going around saying they lying, they guilty, right? He is only the one allowed to make a comment. So this is his YouTube. This is actually his YouTube channel. Ready for this? Let's click on his YouTube channel and see what's there. These are his liked videos. So this is the video we went to that he liked. And look at here. He liked the Central Park 5, where another corrupt cop defends the whole things that happened to the Central Park 5. Remember, corrupt cops defend corrupt cops. So you have a corrupt cop who's actually defending a corrupt cop, basically defending corruption at his police department. So he likes this video and he follows this nigga on Twitter. Can you guys see it? Oh, shoot, you can't see it. Hold on, let me see if I can break it up. Here we go. There you go. You should be able to see it now. There you go. Look at there. Look at there. So, Eric Reynolds, please remember this. Eric Reynolds is a corrupt cop who worked for a corrupt police department, in New York. And he likes another corrupt cop, Brandon Tatum. Remember what I said, beloved. Remember what I said. Corrupt cops defend other corrupt cops. Corrupt cops defend corruption. And corrupt people defend other corrupt people. Never forget that. That's why these fools love Donald Trump. And that's why they love each other, because and karma's going to get them. Trust me. Karma's going to get them, especially Brandon and Candace. But I just wanted to show you that Eric Reynolds ain't nothing but a piece of shit corrupt cop who's now trying to muddy the waters and act like he is actually debunking debunking the facts that are presented. But Eric will never have a one-on-one debate with me or anyone who's very close to the case. So that in itself should tell you something. Just like Brandon Tatum and Candace Owens and Anthony B. Logan, you know what I'm saying? They refuse to have a one-on-one discussion with me because they know I know my stuff. They know that I am nothing to mess with, and they know that they will be exposed for the grifters they are. They are. So that concludes this very long video. Thank you so much for writing it out with me. Like I said, this is a good video for those of you who can't stomach through the miniseries. I totally understand. Feel free to share it. You can also re-upload it to your channel. You have my permission, but only the videos dealing with this. You can also take it and have a discussion with it if you want. You can also share it with anyone who's in doubt and dare them to take all of the sources within this video and debunk it along with my arguments. This is Tree from treeoflogic.com. You all have a good one, and I'll see you next time. Later, taters.